All right, I think we're live on one of the pages. I'm having a little bit of trouble. Let's see. All right, so it looks like it went on the Mildred Westervelt Warner Transportation Museum. I'm going to do a double check. That's the first time doing these museums from your home live streams that's happened. That's very strange. So we had a little bit of an issue with the Gorgas House, but I think it's okay now. So it looks like we're live on the Mildred Westervelt Warner Transportation Museum. And let's see if we're live on the Gorgas House Museum. Yep. So it looks like we're live there. And I'm going to check the YouTube channel. If you prefer watching these on YouTube, you can go to youtube.com/UA Museums. Looks like we are live on all locations now. So that is good. All right. So I guess I will go ahead and get us started this morning. Welcome to today's Museums from Your Home live stream presented by the University of Alabama Museums. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I'm the Communication Specialist for UA Museums. And joining me today are Catherine Edge, Director of the Mildred Westervelt Warner Transportation Museum, and Brandon Thompson, Director of the Gorgas House Museum. And I see we have a guest today. So Brandon, would you like to introduce him?
I would be happy to. Today we are joined by Dr. Clay Nelson. He recently defended his dissertation, I think last week or earlier this week. We'll pick his brain about that as we go on. He defended his dissertation well, we'll get to it, but he's within the University of Alabama's Department of Anthropology, was also a participant in the Museum Studies program here at the university. So looking forward to talking to him today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Clay. And before I turn it over to you guys, I just want to remind everybody that you can feel free to ask them any questions that you might have or put any comments you might have in the comment section. And just remember that this is live, so anything can happen. So hang in there in case we have any issues. Hopefully we won't, but just be patient with us if we do. All right, so now that we've gotten some of that business out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to you guys to get us started.
Thanks. Well, hi, Clay. Thanks so much for joining us today. Okay, so kind of get us started. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and how did you get interested in archaeology?
Yeah, so my background is I've been at the university for, oh Lord, like 12 years now. I got my BA there in 2012 and then my MA all in anthropology. That's what I knew I wanted to do. And I'm from the area. I live in Vance and I went to high school only like 20 minutes away. So I haven't really traveled far. I got interested in archaeology like everyone else, I think. So like Indiana Jones, right? Yeah. That and
Absolutely.
Egyptian archaeology was always a thing of mine. And then I realized you could do it without having to leave home. I could just do it in my backyard, basically. So
minus the mummies, right? Though, Clay.
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially this year. Don't mess with the mummies this year, right?
Yes, no. 2020 is not the year for the undead.
No, not at all. Oof, Lord. But yeah, and so that's how I got interested in archaeology, and I've been sticking with it ever since, really.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because we're going to really explore how archaeology and history and museums are all related. And what I'm excited to really touch on and really talk about are the experiences of a student and a recent doctoral candidate who just completed his dissertation and really kind of coalesce all those issues and those themes. So I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun. So what are some of your research interests and what draws you to those topics?
So for my dissertation, and one of the largest things that I'm really interested in is sort of coalescence, actually. So the sort of the creation of your historically known Native American tribes. I really like looking at that because we always think of, everyone learns about in Alabama the 5 civilized tribes, as they always wanted to call them, which I hate that term, but that's what we even call them still in our textbooks, right? And it's like the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole, Choctaw. Did I say that one? Anyway, I study mainly the Creek in the Coosa River Valley, but I'm really interested in the ideas of social identity, of how these groups after European contact are very resilient, and they're still here today, and how they came to be the way they are, looking at the archaeology. So that's kind of what I'm really interested in. And then I've also done work at Moundville. So my interests kind of go everywhere, but mainly looking at sort of social identity and the creation and maintenance of that.
That's fascinating. I think it really speaks to the strength of not only archaeology, but also anthropology as a discipline, is that it is so interdisciplinary. It can really encompass a wide range of different subjects and fields, and really can kind of be applied to other issues and other concepts, which is what we're going to touch on a little bit later today. So I'm excited about that. So in terms of your dissertation, I know you were looking in the Coosa River Valley, looking at the coalescence. Did you end up having to do field work? Did you do collections and archival studies? And if you did field work, what did that look like? And what was your dissertation question? What was your research question?
Yeah, so actually, all of my work, I didn't do any field work for my dissertation. It was all through legacy collections. So it's all stuff that was housed by museums. Really, the Office of Archaeological Research at the University of Alabama. So my main focus in the Coosa River Valley was this cool site in Talladega County called the Hightower Village site. It was excavated back in the 80s. And this stuff has just been sitting on the shelves down at OAR since then. Not much has been done with it. And so I was trying to actually parse out and get some gems out of all of the dirt from it, basically. So really looking at a lot of the ceramics from that area. So, you know, all the potters in these areas, you have different kinds of pottery that was being made, and you can tell differences according to regions. So like some of your Black Warrior River pottery looks different than some of your Northwest Georgia pottery, which looks different from some of the stuff on the Tallapoosa and Coosa rivers. And at this site, and in Talladega County in like the 1600s and 1700s, you get this weird hodgepodge of ceramics at sites where it looks like they come from multiple areas, or at least they have ceramic making traditions that come from multiple areas. And so I was trying to parse out and see if that was something that was happening all at once, or if this is something that was a change over time, and then whether or not you could tell if there were different, say, potters living at the same site from different regions, and trying to see if there was some sort of migration or people just wanting to adopt pottery traditions from other areas, or what it was. So like, you know, after European contact, when all the populations in the area started to plummet and people were having to move around on the landscape a lot, they were trying to find ways to survive as groups. And one of the ways they did that is through what we call coalescence. So this idea of where all of these multiple people would come together for economic benefit and sort of militaristic protection from other groups. And they would move around on the landscape trying to find each other. They had these networks that had been going on for generations before you get into the historic period in the 1540s. So they're using all of these communication networks that they had beforehand, all these interactions, to then reinforce these social ties and find new ways of communicating and new ways of living with each other that would help everyone out. And so that's pretty much what my dissertation was on.
All right, that's fascinating. I could do a deep dive into that and ask you a ton of questions about it, and probably a lot of them you just got from your dissertation defense. So in terms, I'm going to sidetrack just a little bit and ask you about your defense. I know you just did it, I think it was last Monday, last Tuesday?
Tuesday, yeah.
Okay, and I know you had to do it at distance, the same format we're doing now. So really, what were some of the more interesting questions that you got from your committee? And what was it like having to do your defense at distance, doing it like this? What were some of the challenges? What was your experience with that?
Oh, yeah. So some of the more challenging questions I got, really, it was all about my theory, because one of the things that draws me to identity is the fact it's complicated and I don't understand it completely. And so like I have to study it a lot. And that's how I ended up just getting interested in it in the first place. And so most of them were about like how I was actually able to take an idea of social groups that is this living, breathing thing with people and try and put that onto the archaeological record. How can you see that in the materials? Because of course it doesn't always come out. You know, different groups may use the same materials, and then other groups that they may consider themselves part of like the same ethnic group, but they might have two groups that practice different manufacturing processes or use different things. So materials don't always overlap with your ideas of ethnicity or identity. And so that was some of the more challenging questions I had. And then as far as, oh gosh, doing it over Zoom, I was hoping with it being over Zoom, not a lot of people would show up, but I had like 20 some odd people there. I guess no one has anything else to do, so they all showed up. But it was good. I didn't get a lot of questions from the audience. I only got like one, which I'm fine with. But a lot of people weren't very comfortable talking on Zoom. And then, of course, the same issues I'll have here. So like trains in the background and a kid running around. And
part of the magic of online education, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was late to my own defense, too. So, yeah, I was trying to get in right at 2, and it kept bumping me off. Zoom wouldn't let me in.
Yeah, that's not stressful at all.
Not at all.
No.
I was texting someone like, this is going swimmingly. I'm late to my own defense.
But you're Dr. Nelson now.
That's right.
So we can touch that a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to backtrack. I'm going to go back to the Hightower site itself. So a couple questions on that. So the Hightower site, was that an academic excavation, or was this part of like a larger cultural resource management program?
A little. It wasn't really cultural resource management as much. It was the museum expeditions, actually. The museum expeditions did it in 1984, 1985, and then partially in 1987, along with Jacksonville State University. So this was like Carrie Oakley, Harry Holstein, those sorts of people. For anyone that knows all the history of Alabama archaeology should know those names. But
familiar,
yeah, they kind of had their fingers in a lot of different sites over the years. But yeah, they dug it up using museum expeditions, and then they had just community members and people from the Alabama Archaeological Society come out and dig it. So most of it was dug by high schoolers, actually. And I was able to make a dissertation out of it. So that says something to the way they were doing the field work, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it talks to the strength of that program of expedition. So yeah, everybody check that out. That's a pretty good program.
Yeah, definitely.
This year it's virtual, but hopefully next summer it'll be a great opportunity to get more of our younger generation out in the field and hopefully spark some interest for them. But yes, everybody, just so you know, this year it is virtual, but it's still happening nonetheless.
So yeah, please everybody check that out. And if you or your students, your children want to get involved with it, Allie Sorley is an amazing field cook. You'll be well fed and you'll go to sleep really well every night for it. So Allie, if you're watching, thank you. I had some really, really good food on the expeditions I participated in. But getting to the idea of collections work versus field work, oftentimes, these excavations create a tremendous amount of data with thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of artifacts. And for a large part, this will going along with one thesis or one field report or one dissertation. But this content, this material is still there. And we can ask as many questions to try and answer as we are creatively inclined to do so. And I think it speaks really highly to your dissertation that you're able to use these legacy collections that sit in curation facilities, collection facilities, even museums themselves, and use that as your dissertation topic. So I commend you for that. That's really, really incredible.
Yeah, it was almost like actually an archaeology of archaeology. So like I didn't actually have to go out and dig, but trying to piece back all the stuff together. So trying to take other people's field notes and all the field forms and then find the material. Because this isn't actually fully curated yet. It's still in what we would call the stacks. So it was like over 300 boxes, most of it unwashed pottery, still in the field bags from 1980. So
yeah, that's a bit of a time commitment, I can imagine.
I think I'm
all
like,
right. So
I was gonna say, I think I'm like the third person or so that Dr. Jim Knight tried to get to use the Hightower site for their dissertation, and I was the one that stuck with it. So nice. I don't know what that says about me, but
dedicated.
You're perseverance, resolute. I think those are the adjectives we could use to describe you. All right, so to pivot a little bit, You participated in the University Museum Studies Certificate Program when you were in graduate school. What can you tell us about the program and what really drew you to it? What kind of use did you see that in your career path and your trajectory?
Yeah, so it's kind of weird. I started taking some of the classes that they were offering before it was actually a formal program. So they kept saying, we're going to try and get this museum studies program in, and this will be some of the courses you could take. And I was interested in them anyway. So like I took classes on the anthropology in museums, museum administration. That was when the program first actually became formalized, and then cultural resource management, things like that. And I was interested in it because because my master's thesis also only used legacy collections. So I have a real affinity for taking things that are stored in museums and in research facilities and trying to then use them again, because I mean that's what they're there for, right? And they all hold a lot more information than what's been said about them. And so they're a lot of times this untapped resource. And so I was really interested in that. And I thought having the museum studies certificate, being able to do that would help me actually be even more understanding of what goes on behind the scenes in museums and in the administrative processes and just behind the scenes as far as curation goes. And then because I was using museum stuff anyways, it was just a double whammy, right? It didn't take too much more time because I was already interested in all of it. And so I could add that on for my professionalism CV. But yeah, that's how I kind of got into it, really. And I just kind of ran with it. I really enjoyed it. And I didn't want to use my dissertation stuff for my museum internship. I wanted to do something different. And luckily, since I knew Brandon, I could ask him if he needed any help with anything. And of course, he had stuff to throw at me. So I was able to go with that, which was nice because then he was also still using legacy collections.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're gonna dive deep in that in just a little bit. Yeah, that was been a lot of fun that was a really fun project to work with you on. And we've got that PowerPoint, that presentation, those images that we can actually show everybody in just a second, and how that project really came together and what the end product of it was. And you answered my next question just a little bit in that explanation. But what else can you tell us about what you find compelling about working in museums, or what do you find compelling about working with museums or the content within it?
Yeah, so one thing I've always loved going to museums and stuff, right? So you have all of the exhibits that you get to see as the public, but then there's always the behind the scenes stuff. So you have where you're trying to actually make the exhibits. How can you actually communicate this stuff to the public, which is difficult in itself because you have to do it in a small space, a lot of times with small budgets and a small time frame. And then and it's a different way of communicating to the public than say what a lot of us do in archaeology or in academia and the other parts of academia, because we're writing in journals a lot of times, things that most of the general public's not going to read or see. And even if they do, who knows if they would understand it? I mean, I barely understand some of the stuff I read. So it's not always the most accessible, but in museums is really where you can be more accessible to the public. And kind of get the story out there, what archaeology is and what it can tell us about our past, and then how it actually interconnects with our written history, which I love. And I really think that museums can be a good advocate for understanding some of our past, even just as a nation, as a state, and then even before we were a nation or a state here in North America. And I think museums is really a good place to start with all that.
Yeah, we actually did.
Yeah, you touched on a few issues. Go
very
ahead.
similar at whenever, and actually Brandon was involved with this project too, because we just had the bicentennial. We developed, and the Transportation Museum is more or less the local history museum that focuses on the history of Tuscaloosa through the lens of transportation. And so in that capacity, with the bicentennial coming up, we would have just been remiss if we hadn't done anything special. And so we actually developed a two-part exhibit series that looked at a particular block in downtown Tuscaloosa. And we just looked at different time periods, like pulling all the information from that one block. It's the Bank of the State site where Embassy
Yeah.
Suites Hotel, is now. And but one of the things in developing the exhibit, just along the lines that you were just describing, was we wanted to make sure that when the public came in and witnessed this exhibit, that we started with the archaeology of the site, and it wasn't just the story of, you know, yeah, archaeologists dug this block up. It was more, we went into what is a feature, how do archaeologists do archaeology, all of that. And so that was basically our introduction for the entire series. So when visitors left, somewhat jokingly, but at the same time very accurately, we wanted them to understand that archaeology was not Indiana Jones by the time they left. If they came in thinking that, fine. But by the time they left, the goal was not only the history of Tuscaloosa, but it was also how we can use archaeology to expound upon that history, and ultimately understand it better. And so, just along those lines, we made that the focus of the beginning of that entire series, so that there would be more knowledge about what archaeology is, and ultimately how archaeology, history, and museums can and so frequently do work together. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because
Yeah.
we just did that very thing ourselves.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I had originally wanted to do in my exhibit for the Gorgas house, part of it was going to be like, hey, here's some of the not fancy things we found in the exhibit. I just didn't have the space for it, really. I mean, like, just show them random, like, hey, look, we found some brick and some really broken up pottery. This is mostly what we're finding. But along with all the nice things that you see. Yeah, and I think that's a great way to go about it too. And I think understanding how we got the stuff out of the ground and then able to make stories from it really helps people understand, like, we're not making this up when we tell you things.
Or if it's something that, there's a story that people that are that's well ingrained in the community, if there's a way to find a foundation and a basis for that story, then it determines less local folklore and then more proper local history. And oh, I see a little head. Hi.
Yeah, that's my daughter.
She's precious. But you're right. Like, archaeology is a really, really great way to give a solid foundation to history, and and it stops being simply a story or simply names and dates and places, and it starts to really be more tangible, I think, for people. And that's I think that is all museums do that in some capacity, whether it's natural history or airspace, rocket center, whatever. It's taking those sometimes very lofty ideas and making them more tangible, making them more physical.
Oh, yeah.
And that's I'm so glad that your dissertation just helped to reiterate all of that through collections, because collections are they're so important. Without the collections, we don't have anything to show in museums. There's nothing to research. And especially with OAR and the anthropology department, and what Brandon strives to do at the Gorgas House, what we work on here, all of that starts with archaeology collections. That is the foundation. So I think I think everything that you've done is just absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much for all of your work. I think I think you've done a great job, and yeah, you just keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks.
Yeah, what was fun about that excavation, the Embassy Suites site, the Bank of the States site, is something that we got to do is really a concept called ground truthing, where you have these historic documents that tell you one thing, and then you look archaeologically at the cultural material and the man-made features in the landscape and see if those two things match up. And a lot of the times they did, and sometimes maybe not so much, but other times you could really speak like factual cultural material truth to these historic documents, and they can both be fallible, they can both be interpreted different ways, but that was something that was really fun to kind of work on and really coalesce what these things did. Because, oftentimes in museums, we show the pretty things, which is what we want to do. We want to drive people in and bring them in to see these things. But archaeology, at its heart, is the collection of all these things. So all the thousands of pieces of broken glass and thousands of pieces of broken pottery, that is all archaeology. That is all information. And that is something that we're still interested in and want to share with the public. But I think kind of getting back to Clay's dissertation and his work within the museums, like that really is the point of what we're trying to do, is really show the humanity of our history. And these two disciplines really can bring those two things together.
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember though, Ian Brown, my advisor, always tells me what James Dietz always told him. He was like, if you had a choice between just the archaeology or just the history books, you tend to take the history, right? Because it can give you more of that colorful mindset, some of more of those details. But what's great is when you can actually marry the two a lot of times, or and then history, the written history, only goes so far before then you have to use the archaeology, and then that's where we come in to try and fill in all those gaps, and then give the stories for the people that weren't written about in the historical documents, and before you had any sort of writing for some of these groups. So I really think they can work well together, and then and we can come up with some great things.
Yeah, Rebecca's got a great shot of that's actually a bit of installation of that Bank of the State site, the first one, where we were, and you can kind of see we've got the titles there of those some of those panels, going into details, what is a feature, so that as visitors moved through the museum and saw that word, they they had a better understanding of what it was, from an archaeological definition and standpoint. And then of course we couldn't not go into the history of the site. And as whenever you were both talking about all the things that are found in archaeological digs, and I have personal experience from my own field school, this particular site was excavated in 1987 and then was excavated again more completely in 2013. And so not only do you find so many remnants that were missed in the first excavation, you also find remnants from that first excavation. I can't tell you how many pop tops we found during my field work in Moundville from the last time that area was excavated. And it was, so there's it's really really interesting to see all of the evidence that people leave. Anything from broken glass, broken bricks, pieces of pottery, old pocket knives, things like that, and a wad of string from one of the last field schools that was there, and might have missed that during cleanup, which is still part of the history of the site, so but it all does work together in a very intricate way that is maybe not as obvious until we tell the story in in places like museums, so we have the space and the environment to do that. So I just whenever y'all were talking about that, I thought, yeah, pop tops and string and all sorts of things can also show up in those excavations.
Yeah, I've known archaeologists who will flip a coin into their test units when they're done. It's like from that year that they did the excavation, in case anybody ever comes back, they'll understand exactly the last time somebody looked at this. So yeah, I've known archaeologists to do that. There were archaeologists in the past who made their own medallions to let everybody else know that this was excavated by this archaeologist in 1912 or something like that. It's, once again, we're people. We're going to leave our own mark on these histories that we're exploring. Yeah, absolutely.
I did something similar when I was in whenever I was leaving my room, I in graduate school, because I was overseas. I dug through my change purse where I still had a little bit of American coinage, and I found a penny that had that year on it, and I hid it in the room as my own little hey, an American was here at this year, and tucked it away. So I actually am guilty of that. I did do that when I was leaving my room in graduate school. I wanted to leave my little mark in Leicester, England, and I don't know if that penny is still there or not. But I hope it is. But
Your
yeah,
own little
I actually
Catherine Tea
understand
Party in
that.
England. I like it.
Yes, I
I like
did.
that.
And I
Yeah,
made sure
that's
it was an
great.
American coin. So so just an extra little leftover of personality. But
Leaving our
Clay,
mark everywhere.
right. I have a question for you about your internship with the Gorgas House. And so can the internship is part of the certificate program, but you said you didn't want to just make your internship part of the work you were already doing. You wanted to do something different. So what was your motivation to more or less do that extra little bit of work for yourself with everything you were already working on? So what caused you to do something a little bit different like that?
Yeah, it kind of doesn't make sense, does it? I'm trying to get done. Why wouldn't I just do like I've done everything else and just pile it on top of that one thing I'm already doing? But so I have been looking at my dissertation research and doing it for a good 3 years or more. And so I felt like I needed a little bit of a small break from something. And one of the cool things with the museum internship is it is a set number of hours, right? You can go over that, which I think I might have. I don't know. But the main thing is you got to get that minimum of, it's like what, 40 or 80, 40 hours?
40.
Yeah, 40 hours. And I knew that and I knew from talking to Brandon before that the excavations, the materials I would have been using for the exhibit were already well curated and well documented. So I could easily start pulling from there and make my exhibit and kind of add the contextual information as I went. So I was able to it was going to be less effort than my dissertation, but also give me a nice fresh thing to look at. So I wasn't constantly looking at the same things over and over.
A nice little mental break, if you will.
Yeah, that's what it was. A nice little mental break, right? I guess that is what a lot of times graduate students do. When we take mental breaks, we end up doing just another thing in our field.
Well, and can you tell us a little bit more about exactly what your internship was? Because it looks, if my eyes don't deceive me, it looks like there was still archaeology as that was a
Yeah,
part of your internship with the Gorgas House. So could can you tell us a little bit about how all that came together to result in your
definitely.
internship?
Yeah, so I asked Brandon if he had anything that would help me do this internship, and he was like, I actually do. He wanted to do an exhibit and bring up the excavations that happened. When was that, like late 90s, early 2000s, I think it was? Or
99, 2000. Yeah.
yeah, the excavations that happened at Gorgas House at that time. So they did a ground penetrating radar, which I couldn't ever get a good image of much of that into my exhibit, but they did a ground penetrating radar survey all around the house, trying to find areas from some of the the houses that were, or the outbuildings from around it, and any of the garden plots that would have been around the house, and other features that would have been there that have been covered up as we try and integrate really the Gorgas House into the whole campus landscape. Because all of that tends to change on the surface, but we left a lot of things in the ground. And he wanted to see if there was anything from there we could add some more contextual information to the Gorgas House itself. And so that's what I ended up doing. Yeah, and I wanted to show what some of the excavations looked like from the house and some of the more interesting features we found. And one of the main ones I focused on was, you saw that blue bead that we had right there. What we ended up finding was that this was a cut blue glass bead to about 1840, dates to about 1840 or so. And it was found in where we think the kitchens were, which was right under Morgan Hall, kind of that what is it, like, I think it's like the northeast corner of Morgan Hall. Isn't that right? Yeah. And
yeah, northeast corner. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just right back behind the house where you had these kitchens. But why would a blue glass bead be in your kitchen stuff? It's also, as Brandon was able to tell me, and we were able to find documentation of where there was the slave quarters right above that. And that really wasn't talked about in the excavation report, because a lot of the times when you're doing these excavation reports, you're adding some historical and contextual information to the stuff, but you're really just trying to make sure that you have a nice record of what was found. So someone else can come back later and then add more context if they want to do more research. And so that's what we're doing here. We were able to add to the story of the Gorgas house and actually show where possibly some of the slaves would have lived and worked that would have been associated with the house and with the university itself. And I really got into that. I was really interested in that. And that unit was really interesting to look at, a lot of the stuff from it. But along with that, we were able to find many other parts of the excavation of the Gorgas house. So things that from the Civil War, and then from after the Civil War, and then up into the early 1900s. And which was nice for me too. That was a nice, just a fresh mental break, because all of my stuff from my sites from the 17th century. And so being able to get some more into the historical archaeology was just a nice little break.
Yeah, what I loved about your project and what I love about blending archaeology and history museums is that it has the potential to expand the interpretation. So the Gorgas House, is done in memorial and in honor of the Gorgas family and all their contributions, both to the university, the state, the nation, internationally, when you start talking about William. But it's a rather narrow focus, at least traditionally. So bringing in the archaeology allowed us to expand that narrative, really expand its interpretation, and cohort kind of going also along with like archival research is always ongoing. So being able to find like the Blue Bead especially really helps us expand our interpretation and our narrative to go along with histories that really haven't been talked about. So when you have that blue bead, that is tangible, physical evidence of slavery in this location. We're able to expand our interpretation to give voice and to explore the humanity of another group of people that aren't traditionally and historically talked about in this physical space. And I can't tell you how many people have come in and read that and have this powerful feeling that, oh, I had no idea. Oh, well, this is really incredible. So where the display case is centered in the back post office, you're looking back out where the kitchens were. So you can see this entire archaeology, you can learn about all the outbuildings, but it also provides this emotional anchor, this historic anchor to this point in our history that we need to talk about more. And I think that's one of the strengths of blending the archaeological approach and the museum studies approach and the historical approach. You can blend all of these different disciplines together and talk about these histories that we typically don't talk about or continue to do so. And that was probably my favorite thing that you were able to do with your exhibit, with your internship. It was a pleasure to be a part of it.
Yeah, it was a really cool opportunity too, because I think we're kind of subverting what was done in the past. So when Morgan Hall was made, they tore down what was left. I'm sure that part of the kitchens were already gone, but they then put the footing of this huge building right on top of where it was. And it's almost a physical thing, if you want to get into social memory, of trying to stamp out that past in a way or hide it and from the public and remake the university in a different image, where you kind of ignored the fact that we had these people on campus that were enslaved, or the fact that we have have workers on campus that we don't have much record of, or don't want to talk about much. And it was this almost physical obliterating of history, but the archaeology was able to bring that back in. And now you can actually see it there in the Gorgas house itself, which I thought was really cool to do. And then I also got some great experience making my own exhibit, because I ended up taking part of an old exhibit case from the Museum of Natural History basement and then redoing it and remaking it. I'm not the best woodworker, so I hope it's still standing and hasn't fallen down, but
it's still standing. I was saying this morning, it's still standing just fine.
Okay,
yeah, we
good.
definitely learned to do. We definitely learned to do a lot with very little. I think being adaptable and resourceful is a strength for anybody. So yeah, absolutely, it's still there.
And actually, in some of my job interviews, so now that I'm out of school or getting out of school, as I finished all the edits on my dissertation, I'm have to find a real job. And the museum study certificate has actually come in handy for putting on my thing, because not only with the saying like, hey, I had an internship or with museums, or hey, I've studied how to do like museum administration. So I have some experience working with nonprofit organizations, grant writing, and then being able to work within budget and timeframes for doing projects, which are all things I learned to do and are able to then put on in my resumes.
So we touched on this just a little bit, and especially within part of this conversation, but how do you see the relationship between archaeology and museums changing as time moves on?
Oh yeah, so if you look at a lot of, say, your early museums and stuff, your collections aren't always archaeologically related. A lot of them are from people donating things, or people are acquiring things from sales and estates and stuff. But one of the cool things with museums is that as society changes and we want to learn more and we want to do more, as far as just learning about our past, museums have gone along with that too, and have really kind of pushed us forward in that momentum. So you had museums early on, especially say like with the Smithsonian or places in England, like with the Ashmolean, where you had museums that they're just showing lots of things. You're just putting things out there and people can go, oh, that's nice, that's pretty. Not a lot of contextual information, right? And then they changed over time to get where we are now, where you're telling stories. And then the archaeology articulates those stories. Like we talked about before, you kind of have this almost tangible evidence of that history that can then be put on display and give another colorful sort of textual and contextual experience. It's almost like a phenomenological experience, right? So when you go into a museum, you're not just learning about it, you're kind of experiencing it in these different ways. And I think that's one of the ways that archaeology is articulated in a museum.
Excellent. So, being a student, being a recent graduate, or at least defending your dissertation. Yeah, pretty close. What advice would you give students interested in pursuing work in anthropology or archaeology or museums?
Lord, most of the time I say don't do it. No, I'm kidding.
That's an easy answer.
No, with grad school is a different horse all by itself. So if you'd asked me like a few months ago, that would have been my answer. But now, as far as interest in it, I would say you kind of have to go for it if you're going to do it. It's easier now than what 50, 60 years ago you would have had mainly just affluent people being able to do it. But I didn't come from an affluent background, and I was able to do this. You have to work hard, and it takes a long time. But that's mainly what grad school is, right? If you can put in the effort and the time, then you're going to be able to be successful at it. And so that's my main thing. That, and don't go to grad school unless you're going to get paid. Make sure you get funding.
Easier said than done for some, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I got an outside funding resource who were fantastic, and I can talk about them forever. But yeah, they were incredible. But yeah, funding doesn't hurt.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, and you have to figure out ways. You have to figure out where your investment's going to be, right? And figure out if this is something you actually want to study and do for years upon years upon years. Sometimes even I get tired of the archaeology or reading about it, but then you find something really cool and interesting or new, and it reignites that sort of passion to be able to keep doing it.
So your Gorgas internship showed how close related the two fields are. So along those lines, what are some other ways you see your future work intersecting with museums?
Yeah, so a lot of my work, so I gained a lot of relationships during my grad school career with some tribal governments, and then the museums and academia itself. So I was able to get a lot of experience with different people from different backgrounds. And I think that's really going to help me be able to use that in the future, because I'm really interested, not just in archaeology, but the process of trying to get the people that we study, like the so get the present day people like the Muskogee Creek Nation that I've had a lot of dealings with, or some other Native American groups, more involved in the history and the archaeology of what we're doing. So it's basically then trying to almost decolonize the field, where we can go sit and listen and actually talk to these people and see what they say about it. What is their history from their perspective, and get to talk to them, which is something that I want to do. Work more with museums as far as repatriations go, getting more of the voice of Native Americans into the stories that we're trying to tell. That's, I guess, where one of my passions is going. And one of the things that the museum studies program helps me do is because I was able to use a lot of these collections and have to deal at the same time with federal laws and just hold the ethics of how you can tell stories but not marginalize the people that are already marginalized.
So Clay and sorry, Brendan, go.
No, yeah. Before we kind of jump topics, something you mentioned makes me want to just address it real quickly. So you said, you work with tribes, with different, I guess, different representatives of the tribes doing your research. What was that like? What were some of their concerns? What are some of the things they brought up in your research?
Oh yeah,
because I know a lot of research is moving that way and kind of being like a collaborative and decolonizing effort in research and academia. What was that experience like?
Yeah, so it's kind of awkward sometimes, right? So the first 2 years I was in the PhD program were funded by the Muskogee Creek Nation of Oklahoma. And I was doing research that they asked me to do. So I was studying sort of Creek cultural connections to the Tennessee River Valley is the shortest way of explaining what I was doing. And then I would take a lot of what I found, and then most of that was looking at legacy collections as it is too. And from the historical documents, the old excavations, anything I could find, and then I would go and report back to them. So it was kind of a humbling experience at times because I'm standing there in their, the way the Muskogee Creek Nation works is they actually have a council. They have the tribal council, and then they have the complex where the tribal council meets, and it looks like a mound. And on the inside, it's kind of this theater stair-stepped thing where the council would meet at the bottom. And so I was at the very bottom where their council meets, giving a PowerPoint, talking to them about their history. And it was awkward and humbling all at the same time. It was a great experience, though, because it put me in a position I had not been in before, where it's kind of like while I'm the archaeologist, I definitely am not the end all. I'm not the expert on this. It's like they are. And I'm just kind of trying to help them fill in some of the gaps wherever they would want me to. So that was really nice. And then another thing is you learn that we have to kind of stop and listen is a big thing. And that's what a lot of tribes, when you talk to different people from different Native American groups, that's all they really want us to do. Stop, listen, and then actually take what they say and take it to heart and use it to be better, right?
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. Yeah, that must have been quite an experience. It really helps contextualize and help you understand your research and material you're looking at a little bit more. That must have been pretty powerful.
Yeah, archaeology, we're studying the past, but it has real world political and social consequences to what we do. And and we have to remember that, like, even though all the people we're studying technically are dead and it's their trash a lot of times that we're trying to look at, we have to understand that people are still here today that are connected to those people. And so trying to remember that and respect it is it's a challenge at times because we're not always taught that, and it's not always in the history of archaeology to do that. So it's really trying to turn the tables around and give more power and influence to the people that didn't have it before. We always talk about archaeology, right, being the voice of the voiceless, and now we're trying to even do that in the present more than what we've ever done before. And it's a great movement.
So I have a question, Clay. So kind of along those lines, with the these changes that are taking place, how do you think history museums and historic houses can utilize archaeology for community outreach?
Oh, yeah. So use museums and then historical houses too for community outreach. I think museums at times can be great advocates for the communities they're in. Um, like people want to talk about museums not being political places sometimes, but it's like we're everything's political, right? We're all tied together. And one of the greatest things you can do in museums is trying to tell those stories that don't always get told. Like we've talked about, like once again, if you want to use the cliche like I've used, archaeology being the voice of the voiceless. And then where would we then put that so people can learn about it, where kids can experience it in some way? When kids come to museums, I don't think we're expecting them to be able to remember or learn everything that's there, but they can pick up one thing that they didn't know before and it stick with them. Then you're doing your part as a community service, which is what museums are.
Yes, that light bulb moment is always fun to see when you have a chance to see it in any visitor, but particularly in younger visitors. It at least for me personally, it doesn't matter what else happens that day. I thought I saw a kid light up when I said X, and that just makes it all worth it. And like I said, it doesn't matter who the visitor is. But I think I completely agree with you. So I guess kind of along those lines, is there a way or several ways that you think archaeology can help visitors understand history museums and historic houses better? Like from your experience and with everything you've
Yeah,
recently studied, how can archaeology help visitors um, understand these contexts and these spaces better?
so a lot of times, so one of the things being an archaeologist that me and my wife do when we would go on vacations, we always go to all these historical houses, right? All the house museums that you can find, we go to. Um, but one thing I found as a pattern in some of them is, and it's because this is what they have to work with, is mainly that it's all focused around that house, specifically like the inside of the house. You don't really get anything from outside of the house. And I really think a lot of house museums, and the Gorgas house is doing this, right? Where you get physically outside, we look at the things from out around, just even on the grounds of the house itself, getting more contextual information for what's out there, and then also just out of the community itself, right? So the Gorgas house has kind of been over time, not just becoming about the Gorgas family, but almost a University of Alabama history museum in a way. Still looking at it through the lens of the Gorgas family, but it's still a very important part of that context. And I really think that that's one of the ways that a lot of house museums can or have started being even more integral parts of their communities.
So yeah, thanks, Clay. Yeah, that's that's kind of been like our focus in the recent past is, it is certainly the Gorgas family in terms of how it was memorialized and honored, and that's what its mission is. Once again, I've mentioned it before, it's almost a romanticized vision of that history, and it's pretty myopic and narrow. So how can we expand that and explore the entire history of the university? Because it is the only place on campus that can give you a window into that entire historic lens, into that entire historic narrative, from its inception through pre-Civil War, the institution of slavery, the Civil War itself, Reconstruction, all the way up through the Civil Rights era. It's the only place you can get that entire history. So it absolutely does speak to the entire university's history, and that's something we want to do. Okay, so we're coming down to it. We're pretty close to the end of time. So I want to give you an opportunity. I want to ask you, Dr. Nelson, what is next for you? What's coming up? And if there's anything we didn't ask you that we should have, or anything else that you want to talk about, what's up? What's next with you?
Oh, yeah. So putting out applications, trying to find a nice job and all that. At the moment, I'm going to be working at Moundville again. At the moment, I think I'll be helping out with the excavations along the riverbank. So we all know that riverbank is eroding away, and they've been trying for years to mitigate that. And it's working with the Army Corps of Engineers and couple of other, well, and then the University of Alabama trying to keep the whole site from washing away into the river. And so that's what we're going to be working on. Oh, one of the other things I was going to point out, talking about with the house museums, your local museums in small towns or in even bigger cities, the ones that focus, like say the Warner Museum, or like one of the museums I had to work with a little bit for my dissertation, the Comer Museum down in Sylacauga, is they do a great thing because you don't learn about the history of your own city that much in your schoolwork, right? I remember as a kid here, you have Alabama history, but you didn't learn about your own little community. And those museums do that a lot. And I think that's also very important and has to be done. But yeah, that's all I got to say.
Thank you. I was a little disappointed when Brennan said, "So, Dr. Nelson, what's next for you?" I wanted you to say, "I'm going to Disney World." And I was really hoping that you say that.
If we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, I might have said that.
Well, COVID ruins everything.
Yeah. Well, that was a great hour of conversation. A lot of people in the chat really enjoyed it. Wendy says, "Great talk." I agree. And there was also another fabulous presentation comment there. So thank you all for guiding us through sort of the behind the scenes of museum work and what it takes to this is a terrible pun, to dig into what makes museums happen and exploring some of that history. So I'm sorry for that terrible pun, but I feel like it had to be done.
Sometimes it can't be helped.
I can't help it. Can't help it. Well, I think that's going to do it for this hour of Museums from Your Home in our live stream. We've changed our live stream schedule up a little bit during the months of June and July because we've got some big summer virtual events like Museum Expedition that y'all talked about. We've got Bama Bug Fest coming up next month. So we're only going to be doing these 2 days a week, Monday and Wednesday. So Monday, like Clay talked about, we're going to be at Moundville. So if you're interested in Moundville content, you can head over to the Moundville Archaeological Park's Facebook page as well as the UA Museum's YouTube channel. And we'll always be here on Wednesdays talking about history. So if you do want to keep up with the content, if it gets overwhelming of when things are happening and where things are happening, you can just go to YouTube and subscribe to youtube.com/UA Museums. And that will always notify you when we go live, and you can see all the content there as well. You can also, if you want to support what UA Museums is doing and some of the programs and some of the exhibits that we try to put on for the public, you can go to give.ua.edu/museums, and that helps you become a supporting member of UA Museums and help contribute to what we do. All right. Well, I think that is going to be it for us today. Thanks to everybody on the panel for joining us and sharing your experience and your knowledge with us. And thanks to everybody who is watching live. And thanks to everybody who will watch in the future and for visiting UA Museums from your home. All right. Well, hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.